Marcus Chen wiped the grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days, squinting at the massive alien freighter suspended in the docking bay. The Zephyrian vessel looked like someone had crossed a cathedral with a sea urchin, all flowing curves and dangerous spikes. Beautiful in its own way, but a nightmare to work on. Another fusion coupling blown, he muttered, checking his tablet. Third one this month. These Zephyrians either don't know how to maintain their ships, or they're pushing them way too hard. The galactic trade station Prometheus hummed around him with the constant activity of 100 different species conducting business. As the station's chief human mechanic, Marcus had worked on vessels from across known space. Most aliens found human engineering crude but effective. What they didn't understand was that human machines were built to be fixed, not replaced. A sharp screech echoed through the docking bay, followed by several more. Marcus looked up from his work to see 3 small figures darting between the shadows of parked ships. Dragon hatchlings. Even from a distance, he could see their iridescent scales catching the artificial light, their wing membranes still translucent with youth. Great, he sighed. Just what I needed today. Dragon hatchlings were a known problem on trade stations. The adult Draconians were respected members of the Galactic Council, their intelligence and technological prowess making them valuable allies. But their young were difficult. Feral dragon hatchlings were basically flying, fire-breathing toddlers with the intelligence of dolphins and the temperament of honey badgers. These 3 had probably stowed away on some merchant vessel, as hatchlings often did. Once they reached a certain age, young Draconians became intensely curious about the galaxy beyond their homeworld. The problem was that they were also completely untouchable by galactic law. Any harm that came to a Draconian hatchling, even accidentally, could trigger a diplomatic incident that might shut down trade for months. The adult Draconians were fiercely protective of their young, and their retribution was swift and economically devastating. Most station administrators preferred to simply wait for the hatchlings to get bored and leave, no matter how much damage they caused in the meantime. Marcus watched as one of the hatchlings landed on a Centaurian trader's ship and began gnawing on an antenna array. The Centaurian crew could only stand by helplessly, making distressed clicking sounds as their communications equipment was slowly destroyed. Poor bastards, Marcus murmured. He'd seen this scenario play out dozens of times. The hatchlings would cause thousands of credits in damage, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Insurance companies had actually started offering dragon hatchling policies as a separate line item. The smallest of the 3 hatchlings, barely the size of a house cat, let out a pitiful mewling sound. It was clearly the youngest, its scales a duller bronze compared to the brilliant emerald and sapphire of its companions. It kept trying to follow the other 2, but its wings weren't strong enough for sustained flight. Each time it attempted to join them on a high perch, it would flutter frantically before tumbling back to the deck with an undignified thump. Something about the little one's struggles tugged at Marcus's conscience. He'd always been a sucker for underdogs, even when they were technically classified as apex predators. His stomach chose that moment to rumble loudly, reminding him that he'd been working for 6 hours straight without a break. Marcus glanced at his chrono and realized it was well past his usual lunchtime. He walked over to his toolbox and pulled out a thermal container, the smell of spiced beef and vegetables wafting out as he opened it. The effect was immediate and dramatic. All 3 hatchlings froze mid-destruction, their heads snapping toward him with laser focus. The little bronze one actually fell off the landing strut it had been climbing, landing with a soft thud and immediately scrambling toward the scent. Well, that's interesting, Marcus said, taking a careful bite of his sandwich. The hatchlings crept closer, their earlier playful destruction forgotten. Their nostrils flared as they sampled the air, and he could see their pupils dilating with what looked suspiciously like hunger. The emerald hatchling, clearly the boldest of the 3, approached within about 10 feet before stopping and letting out a series of soft chirps. It was obviously trying to communicate something, but Marcus didn't speak Draconian. The universal translators that most species use didn't work on hatchlings. Their neural patterns were too chaotic and undeveloped. "You guys hungry?" Marcus asked, more to himself than to them. He pulled off a small piece of meat from his sandwich and tossed it gently toward the emerald hatchling. The result was instant chaos. All 3 hatchlings pounced on the morsel simultaneously, a tangle of wings, claws, and indignant squeaks. The emerald one emerged victorious, gulping down the meat with obvious relish, while the other two glared at it with what Marcus could only describe as sibling rivalry. Okay, he laughed, pulling off 2 more pieces. There's enough for everyone. This time he threw the pieces in different directions. The sapphire hatchling snatched its portion out of the air with impressive aerial acrobatics, while the little bronze one had to chase its piece as it rolled under a cargo container. When it finally emerged, covered in dust but triumphantly carrying the meat, Marcus felt an unexpected surge of affection for the scrappy little creature. The 3 hatchlings settled down in a rough semicircle around Marcus, their earlier destructive energy channeled into focused attention on his lunch. Their eyes tracked every movement of his hands, and whenever he took a bite, they would lean forward slightly, as if willing him to share more. You know, Marcus said conversationally, I bet nobody's actually tried to communicate with you guys before. They just see the diplomatic immunity and the potential for property damage. The bronze hatchling tilted its head at the sound of his voice, and Marcus could swear he saw intelligence flickering in those golden eyes. Not the simple animal cunning he'd expected, but something deeper, something that suggested these creatures were far more than the feral label implied. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He sealed his lunch container and stood up slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might startle his new audience. All right, you 3. Let's see if we can figure out a better way to handle this situation. Over the next 2 days, Marcus found himself developing an unexpected routine. Every lunch break, he would sit in the same spot in the docking bay, and within minutes 3 small shapes would come gliding down from whatever mischief they'd been causing in the upper levels of the station. The hatchlings were remarkably intelligent. The emerald one, which Marcus had started thinking of as M, seemed to be the natural leader. It would always approach first, head held high with an air of regal dignity that was only slightly undermined by the fact that it had recently been caught trying to eat a security camera. The sapphire hatchling, Saf, was the acrobat of the group. It could perform aerial maneuvers that defied physics, twisting through impossible angles and landing with cat-like grace. Marcus had watched it navigate through a maze of cargo containers without touching a single surface, just for the apparent joy of the challenge. And then there was the little bronze one, Bronny, who had quickly become Marcus's favorite. While the other 2 were flashy and confident, Bronny was determined. It might take 3 tries to accomplish what its siblings did in 1, but it never gave up. There was something profoundly human about that stubborn persistence. Marcus had started bringing extra food, experimenting with different flavors and textures. The hatchlings were omnivorous, he discovered. Though they showed a marked preference for anything with complex spices, they went absolutely wild for his grandmother's curry recipe, and even seemed to enjoy the synthetically grown vegetables from the station's hydroponics bay. Station Administrator Krell wants to see you, came a voice behind him. Marcus turned to see his supervisor, Chief Engineer Walsh, approaching with a concerned expression. What about? Marcus asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew. Walsh gestured toward the 3 hatchlings, who were currently engaged in what appeared to be a game of aerial tag around the docking bay's support pillars. Take a wild guess. Marcus sealed his lunch container and stood up. The hatchlings immediately noticed the change in routine, landing on nearby cargo containers and watching him with curious expressions. I'll be back, he told them, feeling slightly ridiculous for talking to creatures that supposedly couldn't understand him. M chirped once in response, which Marcus chose to interpret as acknowledgement. The walk to the administrative section felt longer than usual. Station Administrator Krell was a Voltarian, a species known for their bureaucratic efficiency and complete lack of humor. His office was a monument to organization, with every surface clean and every document filed with military precision. Mr. Chen, Krell said without looking up from his holographic displays, please explain to me why property damage in Docking Bay 7 has decreased by 93% over the past 2 days. Marcus blinked. That wasn't the question he'd been expecting. I'm sorry, what? Property damage, Krell repeated, finally looking up with his 4 compound eyes. For the past week, those 3 hatchlings have been causing an average of 12,000 credits in damage per day. Destroyed communications arrays, damaged hull plating, contaminated cargo holds. Standard hatchling behavior. Right, Marcus said slowly. And that's bad? Of course it's bad, Krell snapped. But what's worse is the sudden change in pattern. In the past 2 days, reported damage has dropped to less than 800 credits. Do you know what that means? Marcus shook his head, genuinely confused. It means they're not acting like normal feral hatchlings, Krell continued. It means something has changed their behavior. And the only variable that's different is you. Me? Station security footage shows you interacting with them during your lunch breaks. Feeding them. Communicating with them. Krell's voice carried a tone of accusation. Mr. Chen, are you aware that attempting to domesticate or train draconian hatchlings is strictly prohibited under Galactic Trade Regulation 847C? Marcus felt his temper rising. I'm not trying to domesticate anything. I'm just sharing my lunch with some hungry kids. Kids? Krell's antennae twitched with agitation. Mr. Chen, those are wild animals. Dangerous ones. The fact that they're showing modified behavior patterns suggests you may have inadvertently created a diplomatic situation of unprecedented complexity. How is feeding them creating a diplomatic situation? Because, Krell said, pulling up a holographic display, I received a communication from the Draconian Embassy this morning. They're sending a cultural attaché to investigate reports of unusual hatchling integration protocols aboard the station. Marcus stared at the display, which showed an official draconian seal and what appeared to be travel authorizations. Integration protocols? Apparently word has reached the draconian homeworld that their hatchlings are exhibiting non-feral behavior patterns. This is unprecedented. In 300 years of galactic trade, no one has ever successfully communicated with feral hatchlings. I wouldn't say I'm communicating with them, Marcus protested. I'm just feeding them lunch. Krell's compound eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable. Mr. Chen, do you understand the implications of what you're claiming? If you have indeed established some form of communication with those hatchlings, it could revolutionize our understanding of draconian development. It could also completely destabilize the current legal framework that governs their protection. Marcus thought about M's intelligent eyes, Saf's playful acrobatics, and Bronny's determined spirit. Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing. Not a bad thing? Krell stood up abruptly, his full 7-foot height making him an imposing figure. Mr. Chen, the draconian protection protocols exist for very good reasons. Adult draconians are among the most powerful species in known space. Their technology, their military capabilities, their economic influence, all of it is founded on the principle that their young are sacred and untouchable. So what are you saying? I'm saying that if you've somehow bridged the gap between feral hatchling behavior and actual communication, you may have just opened a door that the galaxy isn't ready for. The draconian attaché arrives in 6 hours. Until then, you are to have no further contact with those hatchlings. Marcus felt a surge of protective anger. You can't just abandon them. They trust me now. Trust? Krell's laugh was a harsh clicking sound. Mr. Chen, they're wild animals following food conditioning. Nothing more. You will report to Engineering Bay 3 for the remainder of the day and stay away from Docking Bay 7. As Marcus left the administrator's office, his mind was racing. 6 hours until the draconian attaché arrived. 6 hours before M, Saf, and Bronny would be subjected to whatever investigation the draconians had in mind. He had a feeling that once the adults took over, his unlikely friendship with 3 small dragons was about to become a lot more complicated, and possibly dangerous. The question was, what was he willing to risk to protect them? Marcus tried to focus on his work in Engineering Bay 3, but his mind kept wandering to the docking bay. Every few minutes he found himself glancing at the chrono, calculating how long it had been since the hatchlings' usual lunchtime. They would be looking for him, probably confused about why their routine had been broken. The thought made his chest tight with an emotion he hadn't expected: guilt. He'd accidentally created a bond with these creatures, and now he was abandoning them just when they needed consistency most. Chen, that coupling isn't going to install itself, called out Petty Officer Rodriguez from across the bay. You've been staring at the same diagnostic screen for 20 minutes. Sorry, Marcus muttered, forcing himself to focus on the plasma conduit in front of him. But his hands moved automatically through the familiar motions while his thoughts remained elsewhere. 3 hours into his forced exile, his comlink chirped with an incoming message. The sender ID made his blood run cold. Security Chief Vance. Chen, report to Security Station Alpha immediately. We have a situation. Marcus dropped his tools and ran through the corridors of the station, his imagination conjuring increasingly terrible scenarios. Had the hatchlings hurt someone? Had they damaged something critical? Had Administrator Krell decided to have them removed before the draconian attaché arrived? Security Station Alpha was located near the main docking ring, with large observation windows that provided a clear view of multiple bays. When Marcus arrived, he found Security Chief Vance standing at one of these windows. Her expression unreadable. "Look," she said simply, pointing toward Docking Bay 7. Marcus pressed his face to the transparent aluminum and felt his heart sink. The three hatchlings were huddled together on the deck near his usual lunch spot, but their earlier playfulness was gone. M sat with wings drooped, occasionally letting out soft, mournful calls. Saf was pacing in tight circles, its aerial grace replaced by agitated, ground-bound movement. And Bronny was the worst to see. The little bronze hatchling sat completely still, staring at the spot where Marcus usually sat. It hadn't moved in what looked like hours, ignoring even the playful nudges from its siblings. "They've been like this since about an hour after lunchtime," Vance said quietly. "No destruction, no mischief. They're just waiting." "Waiting for me," Marcus said, the words barely above a whisper. "That's what it looks like, which brings us to our problem." Vance turned away from the window to face him directly. "Marcus, I've been in security for 15 years. I've dealt with dozens of different species, hundreds of first contact scenarios. What I'm seeing down there isn't animal behavior." "What do you mean?" "I mean those hatchlings are grieving. They think you've abandoned them, and they're emotionally processing that loss in a way that suggests complex social bonding. Animals don't grieve like that, Marcus. People do." The implications of her words hit him like a physical blow. "You think they're sentient?" "I think they're a lot more aware than anyone has given them credit for. And I think we're about to have a very difficult conversation with some very powerful aliens about how we've been treating their children." Before Marcus could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the security station. The warning lights indicated an incoming priority vessel, diplomatic class. "The Draconian attaché," Vance said grimly. 3 hours early. Through the observation windows, Marcus could see a sleek Draconian cruiser gliding into the main docking bay. The ship was beautiful in the way that only Draconian technology could be, its hull seemingly grown rather than built, with organic curves that suggested both grace and immense power. "What's going to happen to them?" Marcus asked, nodding toward the three small figures still huddled in Docking Bay 7. "I don't know," Vance admitted, "but I have a feeling everything is about to change. The Draconians have never sent an attaché to investigate hatchling behavior before. Never. The fact that they're taking this seriously enough to dispatch a cultural expert suggests they suspect what we're beginning to realize." The comlink crackled to life with Administrator Krell's voice. "All department heads to Docking Bay 1 for diplomatic reception. Mr. Chen, you are specifically requested to attend." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Requested by who?" The Draconian attaché specifically asked for the human who has been interacting with the hatchlings, Vance said, checking her own comlink. "They know about you, Marcus. They know what you've been doing." As they made their way toward the main docking bay, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the three small shapes they'd left behind. M's regal dignity, Saf's joyful acrobatics, Bronny's stubborn determination. Had he really been interacting with wild animals? Or had he somehow stumbled into something much more significant? The main docking bay was filled with station personnel arranged in formal diplomatic protocol. Administrator Krell stood at the head of the receiving party, his four compound eyes fixed on the Draconian cruiser as its boarding ramp extended. The being that emerged was unlike any Draconian Marcus had ever seen. Where the hatchlings were small and compact, this adult was magnificent, nearly 12 feet tall with scales that seemed to shift color in the artificial light. Its wings were folded against its back, but even so, the span was clearly enormous. Most striking were its eyes, ancient, intelligent, and currently focused directly on Marcus. "I am Cultural Attaché Tissandra of the Draconian High Council," the being said, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones. "I have come to investigate reports of unprecedented hatchling behavior aboard this station." Administrator Krell stepped forward with practiced diplomatic precision. "Welcome to Trade Station Prometheus, honored attaché. We are at your disposal for any investigation you deem necessary." But Thysandra's gaze never left Marcus. "You are the human called Marcus Chen?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, fighting the urge to take a step backward. You have been feeding our young. It wasn't a question, and Marcus sensed that lying would be both pointless and dangerous. Yes, I have. Interesting. Tysandra moved closer, and Marcus caught a scent like ozone and spices. In 300 years of galactic interaction, no species has ever successfully established positive contact with feral hatchlings. They are considered untouchable not just for legal reasons, but because they are believed to be incapable of meaningful social interaction until they reach maturity. They seem pretty social to me, Marcus said, surprised by his own boldness. Something that might have been amusement flickered in Tysandra's eyes. Indeed, which is why I must see this interaction for myself. Take me to them. As the diplomatic party began moving toward Docking Bay 7, Marcus felt a growing sense of dread. He was about to find out whether his lunch companions were simply well-conditioned animals, or if he had stumbled into something that could reshape the galaxy's understanding of one of its most powerful species. Either way, there was no going back now. The walk to Docking Bay 7 felt like a death march. Marcus could feel the weight of Tysandra's attention behind him, along with the nervous energy radiating from Administrator Krell and the other station officials. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would either validate everything Marcus had suspected about the hatchlings, or expose him as a fool who had projected human emotions onto wild animals. As they approached the entrance to the docking bay, Tysandra raised one clawed hand, bringing the entire group to a halt. Before we proceed, the Draconian said, her voice carrying an odd resonance, I must explain something about our young that your species may not understand. Hatchlings are not simply immature versions of adult Draconians. They are fundamentally different beings. Administrator Krell's antennae twitched nervously. Different how, honored attaché? Our development is not linear as yours is, Tysandra explained. Human children grow gradually into adults, accumulating knowledge and experience. Draconian hatchlings exist in what you might call a state of pure potential. They are intellectually capable of adult-level reasoning, but they lack the neural pathways that would allow them to access that capability. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. You're saying they're intelligent but can't use it? Precisely. Until they undergo the awakening, a biological process that typically occurs around their 20th year, they remain in this feral state. It is not a lack of intelligence, but rather an inability to organize that intelligence into coherent thought patterns. That's horrible, Marcus said before he could stop himself. Tysandra's head tilted slightly, her eyes studying him with new intensity. Many species find our development cycle disturbing, but it serves important evolutionary purposes. Hatchlings in their feral state are nearly fearless, incredibly adaptable, and driven by pure instinct to explore and learn. These traits served our ancestors well in a dangerous galaxy. But if they're intelligent, Marcus began, then forcing them to remain isolated from meaningful social contact is indeed cruel, Tysandra finished. Which is why your reports are so significant. Human Marcus Chen, if you have somehow bridged the gap between feral instinct and organized thought, you may have discovered something that could change our entire understanding of our own species. The group resumed walking, but now Marcus felt the weight of even greater expectations. As they rounded the corner into Docking Bay 7, he saw the three hatchlings exactly where he'd left them. Saf, and Bronny huddled together near his usual lunch spot. The moment they spotted him, everything changed. Bronny let out a piercing cry of joy and launched itself into the air, its bronze wings beating frantically as it flew directly toward Marcus. and Saf followed immediately, their earlier lethargy replaced by explosive energy. Marcus found himself with an armful of relieved, chattering dragon hatchlings. Bronny wrapped itself around his neck like a scaly scarf, nuzzling against his cheek and making soft trilling sounds, and perched on his shoulder with regal dignity, but Marcus could feel the creature trembling with emotion. Saf performed a series of aerial loops around the group before landing on his other shoulder. "Well," Tyssandra said quietly, "that answers one question." "Which question?" Administrator Krell asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whether the bond is genuine. Wild animals do not display relief and joy in reunion with another species. These hatchlings are demonstrating complex emotional attachments." Marcus looked up from the three creatures, draped across his body, to find every person in the diplomatic party staring at him with expressions ranging from wonder to fear. There's more, he said, gently disentangling Brawny from around his neck. Watch this. Marcus pulled out his lunch container and opened it. As expected, all three hatchlings immediately focused on the food. But instead of the chaotic scramble he'd witnessed on the first day, they arranged themselves in an orderly line. M first as the leader, then Saf, then Brawny bringing up the rear. They learned to take turns, Marcus explained, offering small pieces of food to each in sequence. Not just conditioned behavior, they actually understood the concept of fairness and applied it to their feeding routine. Tysandra stepped closer, her massive form moving with surprising grace. The hatchlings noticed her approach and their behavior changed again. M straightened to its full height and let out a series of complex chirps and trills. Saf performed what looked like a formal bow, extending its wings in a gesture Marcus had never seen before. Even little Brawny managed to hold still and upright, though it kept glancing nervously at Marcus for reassurance. Fascinating, Tysandra murmured. They recognize my authority and are attempting to communicate in formal register. I have never seen feral hatchlings display such sophisticated social awareness. What are they saying? Marcus asked. Tysandra listened as M continued its melodic commentary, occasionally responded with brief chirps of her own. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Saf and even Brawny occasionally adding their own contributions. M, you call the Emerald One M, is attempting to explain that you are their human friend who shares food and makes safe. It's a complex concept that requires understanding of interspecies relationships, temporal continuity, and emotional bonding. Saf is describing your good warm feeling when human returns. And Brawny, Tysandra paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a note of wonder. Brawny is asking if you are sad, and if there is something they can do to make you happy again. The linguistic structure suggests not just empathy, but active problem-solving oriented toward another being's emotional well-being. The silence that followed was deafening. Administrator Krell looked like he was about to faint. Security Chief Vance had a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Honored attaché, Krell finally managed. What does this mean? For our protocols, for galactic law, for everything, Tysandra said softly. If these hatchlings have indeed achieved organized thought through interaction with this human, then our entire understanding of draconian development may be flawed. It suggests that the feral state is not an inevitable biological necessity, but perhaps a result of social isolation. Marcus felt M shift on his shoulder, the small dragon turning to study Tysandra with obvious curiosity. It chirped once, a sound that somehow managed to convey a question. M wants to know if you are a grown dragon like them but bigger, Tysandra translated with what might have been amusement. And whether you also enjoy human friend food. Despite the gravity of the situation, Marcus found himself smiling. Would you like to share lunch with us? The question was directed at Tysandra, but M immediately began chattering excitedly, apparently translating the invitation for its siblings. Saf performed an enthusiastic loop-de-loop, while Brawny just nodded vigorously. For the first time since arriving, Tysandra smiled, an expression that revealed rows of sharp teeth but somehow managed to convey genuine warmth. I think, she said, that would be the beginning of a very important conversation. 3 hours later, Marcus found himself in the most surreal lunch meeting of his life. The diplomatic party had cleared out after the initial demonstrations, leaving just him, Tysandra, and the three hatchlings in what had become an impromptu cultural exchange. Tysandra had folded her massive frame into a position that allowed her to sit at roughly the same level as Marcus and the hatchlings. She had produced what appeared to be draconian field rations from her diplomatic pouch, crystalline formations that dissolved into complex flavors when consumed. The irony, Tysandra said, delicately consuming one of the crystal formations, is that we have been inadvertently torturing our own young for generations. Marcus paused in the act of offering Brawny a piece of synthesized fruit. How do you mean? Consider what you have discovered here. These hatchlings possess adult-level intelligence, but in our traditional understanding, they cannot access it until biological maturity. We assumed this meant they were content in their feral state, that they lacked the capacity for boredom, loneliness, or intellectual frustration. M, who had been quietly listening to the conversation while methodically working through a portion of Marcus's curry, looked up and chirped something that sounded distinctly like a question. M wants to know why grown dragons don't talk to small dragons, Tysandra translated. The question itself demonstrates the flaw in our assumptions. M is capable of recognizing the social isolation and wondering about its causes. Saf, apparently inspired by the discussion, launched into what sounded like an extended monologue, complete with aerial demonstrations and expressive wing gestures. Tysandra listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions in the musical draconian language. As the conversation continued, her expression grew increasingly troubled. "What's Saf saying?" Marcus asked. Saf is describing what it's like to be a hatchling, the constant feeling of having thoughts that won't organize properly, of understanding concepts but being unable to communicate them to other dragons. Saf says it's like being trapped in a fog where you can see shapes but can't reach them. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. That sounds like torture. Indeed. And Saf also says that talking to you is different, that somehow your presence helps the fog clear. The thoughts become more organized, more accessible. Tysandra paused, studying Marcus with her ancient eyes. You may have accidentally discovered that cross-species social interaction can trigger early cognitive organization in our young. Bronny, who had been quietly following the conversation while staying close to Marcus's side, suddenly scrambled up to his shoulder and began chattering urgently. Bronny is asking if this means they won't have to go back to being alone. Tysandra translated, her voice soft. They're afraid that once the adults understand what's happening, they'll be separated from you. Marcus felt a surge of protective anger. That's not going to happen. I'm afraid it might, Tysandra said gently. What you've discovered here has profound implications for draconian society. If social interaction can indeed trigger early cognitive development, then our entire approach to child rearing will need to be reconsidered. The Council will want to study this phenomenon extensively. Study them like lab specimens? Possibly. There will certainly be pressure to remove them to a controlled environment where the conditions of their development can be carefully monitored and documented. M let out a sharp cry of alarm, apparently understanding enough of the conversation to recognize the threat. It launched itself from the ground to Marcus's other shoulder, gripping tightly with its small claws and making rapid, distressed sounds. M is saying no takeaway human friend, Tysandra translated, and something that roughly translates to, will fight to stay. These aren't experimental subjects, Marcus said firmly. They're people. Intelligent, emotional people who have formed social bonds and deserve to have those bonds respected. Tysandra was quiet for a long moment, studying the three hatchlings who had arranged themselves protectively around Marcus. Finally she spoke. You are correct, of course, but convincing the Council of that will be challenging. Draconians are not accustomed to thinking of hatchlings as individuals with rights and preferences. For centuries they have been considered precious but temporary creatures, valued for their potential, but not consulted about their present experiences. Then maybe it's time for that to change, Marcus said. Perhaps. But change of this magnitude doesn't happen quickly in draconian society. We are an ancient species and our traditions run deep. Tysandra reached out slowly, offering her hand to Bronny. The little dragon sniffed cautiously before allowing itself to be gently stroked. However, I may have a solution that serves everyone's interests. What kind of solution? Instead of removing the hatchlings for study, we could establish a research partnership here on the station. I would remain as a cultural observer, documenting the interaction between human and draconian young. You would continue your relationship with M, Saf, and Bronny, but under formal observation. Marcus considered this. What would that mean practically? It would mean that your interactions become part of an official diplomatic research project. The hatchlings would have legal protection as research participants rather than feral creatures. You would be compensated as a cultural liaison specialist. And most importantly, the bonds you formed would be recognized and protected. Saf chirped something and Tysandra smiled. Saf wants to know if this means they get to keep having lunch with you every day. Every day, Marcus confirmed, and was rewarded with an aerial display of pure joy from all three hatchlings. There is one more thing, Tysandra said seriously. If this research proves what I suspect it will, that early social interaction can fundamentally change draconian development, then you will have contributed to a revolution in how our species understands itself. That kind of change creates both opportunities and dangers. What kind of dangers? political ones. If hatchling development can be influenced by external factors, then there will be factions that want to control those factors. There will be debates about which species are suitable interaction partners, about standardized development protocols, about who has the right to determine how our young mature. Marcus looked at M, Saf, and Bronny, who were now engaged in what appeared to be a competitive eating contest with the draconian crystal rations. They looked so normal, so innocently focused on their simple pleasure of trying new foods with friends. They didn't ask for any of this, he said quietly. No, Lysandra agreed. They simply wanted companionship and understanding. But they may have accidentally become the catalyst for the most significant change in draconian society in 1,000 years. The three hatchlings, apparently satisfied with their feast, arranged themselves around Marcus in their now familiar protective semicircle. M began grooming its emerald scales with meticulous care. Saf started practicing aerial maneuvers in the limited space above their heads. Bronny simply curled up against Marcus's leg and began making soft, contented rumbling sounds. Whatever happens, Marcus said, I'm not abandoning them. They trust me and I won't betray that trust. Lysandra nodded slowly. I believe that commitment may be exactly what makes this partnership possible. Very well, Marcus Chen. Let us see if we can protect 3 small dragons while changing the galaxy. 2 weeks into the official research partnership, Marcus's life had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. The simple mechanics quarters he'd occupied for 3 years had been upgraded to a diplomatic suite that could accommodate both him and his 3 constant companions. M had claimed the highest perch available, a shelf Marcus had installed near the ceiling. Saf had discovered the entertainment value of the suite's holographic display system and spent hours practicing aerial choreography to various music selections. Bronny, predictably, had established itself as Marcus's shadow, rarely straying more than a few feet from his side. The research data they were generating was already sending shockwaves through the draconian scientific community. Daily cognitive assessments showed that all 3 hatchlings were developing reasoning abilities at an unprecedented rate. M had begun demonstrating abstract problem-solving skills that shouldn't emerge until well into adolescence. Saf was displaying spatial intelligence that exceeded even adult benchmarks, and Bronny, despite being the smallest, was showing remarkable emotional intelligence and empathy. The implications are staggering, Lysandra said, reviewing the latest data on her portable holographic display. In just 2 weeks, these hatchlings have achieved cognitive milestones that typically take 2 decades to reach. Marcus looked up from the mechanical schematic he was reviewing. His actual job hadn't disappeared, though it had become considerably more complex with 3 curious dragons helping with repairs. Is that good or bad? Revolutionary, Lysandra replied. The Council is calling it the most significant discovery in draconian developmental science in our recorded history. There are already proposals to establish formal interspecies education programs for all hatchlings. M, who had been listening from its ceiling perch, glided down to land on the table between them. It chirped something in the increasingly complex vocalizations it had been developing. M wants to know if other small dragons are still alone in the fog. Lysandra translated. The question hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. Over the past 2 weeks he'd grown so focused on M, Saf, and Bronny that he'd almost forgotten about the broader implications of their discovery. Somewhere in the galaxy, there were thousands of other draconian hatchlings living in isolated confusion, trapped in their own minds without the social interaction that could set them free. Too many, Marcus admitted. But that's going to change now, isn't it? It's more complicated than that, Lysandra said carefully. The research has attracted attention from multiple factions within draconian society. Some see it as a breakthrough that could revolutionize our entire approach to development. Others view it as a dangerous deviation from natural processes. Saf, apparently sensing the serious tone of the conversation, landed gracefully beside M and added its own commentary to the discussion. Saf is asking why some grown dragons would want small dragons to stay confused. Lysandra translated, her expression troubled. It's a perceptive question that goes to the heart of the political tensions this discovery has created. What kind of tensions? Before Lysandra could answer, Marcus's comlink chimed with an urgent message from Administrator Krell. The text was brief, but alarming. Draconian delegation arriving early. Diplomatic reception in 1 hour. Your presence required. What delegation? Marcus asked, showing the message to Thisandra. Her expression went carefully neutral, which Marcus had learned was a bad sign. I was hoping we would have more time to prepare for this. Prepare for what? The Council has sent a formal evaluation committee to assess the research and make recommendations about its continuation. The committee includes representatives from both progressive and traditional factions. Bronny, picking up on the tension in the room, climbed into Marcus's lap and began making soft, worried sounds. Marcus stroked the little dragon's bronze scales absently while processing this new development. What kind of recommendations are they likely to make? That depends on what they observe during their evaluation. The progressive faction wants to expand the research, establish formal interspecies development programs, and begin immediately implementing social interaction protocols for all hatchlings. The traditional faction? Lysandra paused. The traditional faction wants to shut it down? The traditional faction believes that accelerated development may be harmful to long-term draconian psychology. They argue that our natural development cycle exists for important evolutionary reasons, and that interfering with it could have unforeseen consequences. M let out a sharp cry of alarm and launched itself back toward the ceiling, agitation clear in its movements. Saf began flying rapid circles around the room, its earlier graceful choreography replaced by stress-induced flight patterns. They understand what's happening, Marcus realized. They know someone's coming who might separate us. Their cognitive development includes increasingly sophisticated understanding of social and political dynamics, Thisandra confirmed. They've been following our conversations and drawing logical conclusions about the potential threats to their security. Marcus stood up, gently settling Bronny on his shoulder. Then we need to make sure the evaluation committee sees them at their best. We need to demonstrate that this development is positive, not harmful. Agreed. But there's something else you should know. Thysandra's voice carried a warning tone. The committee includes Councillor Vorthak, one of the most influential traditionalists in draconian government. He has been vocal in his opposition to what he calls artificial development acceleration. Artificial? There's nothing artificial about friendship and social interaction. Nevertheless, that's how he characterizes it, and his influence on the committee's final recommendation will be substantial. Marcus felt a surge of the same protective anger that had first motivated him to share his lunch with 3 hungry hatchlings. Then we'll just have to change his mind. Marcus, Thisandra said gently, Councillor Vorthak is over 800 years old. His views on draconian development have been fixed for centuries. Changing his mind may not be possible. Maybe not, Marcus agreed, watching as M gradually calmed down and resumed its usual dignified perch. But I'm not giving up on them without a fight. They deserve better than being treated like experimental subjects or political pawns. Bronny nuzzled against his neck, making soft trilling sounds that had become its way of expressing affection. Saf settled onto his other shoulder, while M watched from above with golden eyes that held far too much intelligence and worry for a creature that was supposedly feral. You're right, Thisandra said after a moment. They do deserve better, and perhaps that's exactly what we need to help the committee understand. These aren't research subjects or political symbols. They're individuals with their own thoughts, feelings, and relationships. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of 3 small lives depending on him. In less than an hour, he would face a committee of ancient, powerful aliens who would decide the fate of not just M, Saf, and Bronny, but potentially thousands of other draconian hatchlings across the galaxy. The responsibility was terrifying. But looking at his 3 companions, seeing the trust in their eyes and feeling the warmth of their presence, Marcus knew he would do whatever it took to protect them, even if it meant challenging one of the most powerful species in known space. The main conference chamber had been reconfigured to accommodate the Draconian Evaluation Committee, with raised platforms and specialized atmospheric controls. Marcus entered with M on his shoulder, Saf gliding overhead and Bronny walking beside him with determined steps. The 3 hatchlings had insisted on attending the evaluation together, and after 2 weeks of observing their increasingly sophisticated decision-making, both Marcus and Thisandra had agreed to respect their choice. The committee was an imposing sight. 5 adult draconians arranged in a semicircle, their scales ranging from deep midnight blue to brilliant silver. At the center sat Councillor Vorthak, whose ancient bronze scales seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His eyes, Marcus noticed with a chill, held the cold intelligence of someone who had made difficult decisions for centuries. "So," Vorthak said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself seem to vibrate, "this is the human who believes he can improve upon millions of years of draconian evolution." The accusation in his tone was unmistakable. Marcus felt M shift nervously on his shoulder, while Saf's flight pattern became more erratic. Bronny pressed closer to his leg, seeking comfort. "With respect, counselor," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady. "I never claimed to be improving anything. I just shared my lunch with 3 hungry kids." "Kids?" Vorthak's laugh was like grinding stone. "These are wild animals, human. The fact that you project parental feelings onto them does not make them children." That's when M spoke up. The emerald hatchling launched itself from Marcus's shoulder and landed directly in front of Vorthak. Puffing up to its full height and letting out a series of complex vocalizations that filled the chamber with intricate melody, the speech continued for nearly a minute, with M occasionally gesturing toward Marcus, then toward its siblings, and finally toward the assembled committee. The silence that followed was absolute. "What did M say?" Marcus asked quietly. Thisandra, who had been translating throughout the research period, looked stunned. M said that calling them animals hurts their feelings, that they know they're different from grown dragons, but they think and feel just like everyone else. M said that Marcus didn't teach them to be smart. He just helped them organize the smartness they already had. "Impossible," Vorthak said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Feral hatchlings do not possess the linguistic sophistication for such concepts." Saf chose that moment to demonstrate its own development. The sapphire hatchling began an aerial performance unlike anything Marcus had seen before. A complex 3-dimensional dance that somehow managed to convey mathematical concepts through movement. Geometric patterns, algebraic relationships, even what looked like basic calculus, all expressed through the poetry of flight. Saf is demonstrating spatial reasoning and mathematical intelligence, one of the other committee members observed, her voice filled with wonder. The complexity of those calculations should be impossible for a pre-awakened mind. "And yet," said another committee member, "here we are witnessing it." Bronzy, apparently not to be outdone by its siblings, walked directly up to Vorthak and began speaking in the soft, musical tones that Marcus had learned to associate with the little dragon's deepest thoughts. The speech was shorter than M's, but somehow carried even more emotional weight. "Bronzy is asking," Thisandra translated with visible emotion, "why Counselor Vorthak is afraid of them being happy. Bronzy says that being confused and alone was scary, but being able to think clearly is wonderful. Bronzy wants to know why the counselor would want to make them scared again." Vorthak stared down at the small bronze dragon for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. "I am not afraid of your happiness, young one. I am concerned about the price of achieving it unnaturally." Bronny tilted its head and responded with a brief chirp. Bronny asks, "What is unnatural about friendship?" Thisandra translated. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus watched as the ancient counselor studied the 3 hatchlings who had arranged themselves in their characteristic protective formation. M stood tall and dignified, clearly appointed as their spokesperson. Saf hovered nearby, ready to provide demonstrations of their enhanced capabilities. Bronny remained close to Marcus, but its golden eyes were fixed on Vorthak with unwavering courage. "For 800 years," Vorthak said slowly, "I have believed that our development cycle was sacred, that the feral period served essential purposes in building character, resilience, and independence. I have seen the strength that comes from surviving those difficult early years alone. But what about the ones who don't survive?" Marcus asked quietly. "What about the hatchlings who never make it to awakening because isolation breaks them? How many M's and Safs and Bronnies have we lost because nobody was willing to offer them a simple hand of friendship?" Vorthak's gaze shifted to Marcus, studying him with ancient eyes. "You speak of friendship as though it were a simple thing. But what you have created here is unprecedented. These hatchlings display cognitive abilities that challenge our fundamental understanding of our own species." "Maybe," Marcus said, "that understanding needed to be challenged." Another committee member leaned forward. "The data is compelling, Counselor. Cognitive assessments show not just accelerated development, but enhanced development. These hatchlings are demonstrating creative problem-solving, emotional intelligence, and social awareness that exceeds even adult benchmarks in some areas. Social interaction appears to unlock potential that isolation leaves dormant," added another. The implications for our entire species are profound. M chirped something short and decisive. M says, Thesiandra translated with what might have been amusement, that they don't want to be implications. They just want to keep learning and growing with their human friend. Vorthak stood slowly, his massive form unfolding to its full imposing height. He walked over to where the 3 hatchlings waited, looking down at them with an expression that Marcus couldn't read. And what happens? The counselor asked, directing his question to M. When your human friend grows old and dies, humans live such brief lives compared to ours. Will you spend centuries grieving for a friendship that lasted only decades? M's response was immediate and confident. M says, Thysandra translated, her voice soft with emotion, that having loved and lost is better than never having loved at all, and that the friendship they've learned with Marcus has taught them how to make friends with others. They won't be alone again. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Finally, Vorthak nodded slowly. Perhaps, he said, it is time for an old dragon to learn new wisdom from young ones. The counselor turned to address the committee. I recommend that we not only continue this research but expand it immediately. Every draconian hatchling deserves the chance to develop their full potential through social interaction and genuine friendship. And Marcus? Thysandra asked. Vorthak looked at the human who had accidentally revolutionized draconian society by the simple act of sharing his lunch. Marcus Chen will be appointed as the first director of interspecies developmental relations. His primary responsibility will be establishing friendship protocols for draconian youth across the galaxy. Does that mean, Marcus asked, hardly daring to hope, that M, Saf, and Bronny get to stay with me? It means, Vorthak said with what Marcus could swear was a smile, that they will be your co-directors. After all, who better to teach friendship than those who have learned its value through experience? Bronny let out a trill of pure joy and launched itself into Marcus's arms. M performed a dignified aerial bow to the committee before settling regally on Marcus's shoulder. Saf celebrated with a complex aerial routine that somehow managed to spell out thank you in 3-dimensional mathematical notation. As Marcus looked around the chamber at the committee of ancient, powerful beings who had just entrusted him with reshaping the development of their entire species, he realized that his simple lunch break routine had become something far greater than he'd ever imagined. But at its heart, it was still about 3 small dragons who had taught him that friendship could indeed change the galaxy, one shared meal at a time. 6 months later, the first Draconian Human Friendship Center opened on the capital world of the Draconian Empire. It was staffed by specially trained humans who had learned Marcus's techniques for connecting with hatchlings, along with young adult Draconians who had undergone early awakening through social interaction programs. Marcus stood in the center's main hall, watching dozens of hatchlings playing, learning, and growing together with their human companions. M had become something of a celebrity, serving as an ambassador to newly arrived hatchlings and helping them understand that the confusion they felt was temporary. Saf had developed a passion for teaching and spent most days helping younger hatchlings develop their spatial reasoning skills. Bronny, true to form, had appointed itself as the official greeter, ensuring that no hatchling ever felt alone or unwelcome. Any regrets? Thysandra asked, joining Marcus at his observation post. Marcus watched as a tiny silver hatchling took its first tentative flight, with the encouragement of a human instructor, while M offered advice from a nearby perch. He thought about his old life as a simple mechanic, fixing broken machines in the quiet anonymity of Trade Station Prometheus. None, he said firmly. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. And in that moment, surrounded by the sounds of friendship being forged across species lines, Marcus Chen knew that sometimes the most important discoveries came not from grand scientific endeavors, but from the simple human impulse to share lunch with someone who looked hungry.